All right. So, Avery, what is your ethnicity?
I am Blackfeet. I grew up
Okay.
on the reservation about 40 miles outside, 30 miles outside of Cupping.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I'm also white.
Okay. So, which parent is which?
My dad is Blackfeet and my mom is white.
Okay. And how was that dynamic growing up?
Um, so my family, I would say we're unique in the respect that my family chose to distance themselves from their indigeneity instead of being
Okay.
forced to.
Okay.
Um, so my grandparents and my great grandparents made choices. They sent their kids to boarding schools. Kids weren't taken from them. There was a cognizant choice to become more white,
Okay.
um, so that you could survive, so that you could be wealthy, so that you could have a life. Um, so my parents' dynamic was very normal, but I'd say my grandparents' dynamic was more. You could definitely see the difference in their cultures. Like my grandma went to boarding school, was in boarding school until she was 17, and then met my grandpa at a bar. Not that he didn't have plenty of stuff going on too, as the depression,
Your
but
paternal grandparents?
my paternal grandparents, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were they both Blackfeet?
No, my
Okay.
grandparents, both my great grandma and my grandma, married white men.
Oh, really? Okay. And then you said your dad is Blackfeet.
Yep.
Okay. And so but you lived on the reservation.
Yes. I grew up
Okay.
on the reservation.
So with being biracial, what were your experiences on the reservation?
I kind of lived in this space where I didn't feel like I belonged either place. Um,
Mhm.
Cupbank I moved to Frenchtown when I was 15, 14, and I went from my class being like half Indigenous people to having 3 people who were Indigenous.
Okay.
Um, and so a lot of people in Cupbank were living like the same experience as me. They were dual and they maybe identified more as white than they did Indigenous, but people recognized them as Indigenous.
Uh-huh.
But when I moved here, people did not recognize me as Native. They didn't know that Native people looked like me or talked like me or behaved like me. So in Cupbank, it was like I kind of just lived in the space of in between. I went to Indian days, I went to powwows. I was really close with my cousins, but I didn't ever feel like I was like, Native. And then I never really felt like I was white either. I always had the
Uh-huh.
group of Native friends. And there were a couple of friends that, were white and I went to their houses and I'd play with them and stuff, but I always felt othered. So it was very
Yeah.
othered. I was like very much in between. I felt very much in between.
Did your white friends ever tell you you're white?
Not until I moved here.
Really?
That never happened there.
Okay.
I just think they were more exposed there. Here it's like we're only, 11 miles away from a reservation, but most people here haven't like interacted with Indigenous people at all.
Yeah.
And so they have this like very skewed perception. And so it wasn't until I came here. I remember I wore a shirt. I have a Native Pride shirt and I wore it to a basketball game. And girls who were in my grade were coming up to me and like, "You're not Native." And I was like, yes, I am. I don't, well, your brother doesn't look Native. And I was like, that doesn't mean that we're not Native,
How many
you know?
siblings do you have?
I have 2 older brothers.
Okay. And they've all had the similar
Yeah,
experiences.
because my brother, I'm the most, I look the most Native. My oldest
Okay.
brother looks it, but my middle brother is blonde. He's got blue eyes and he's very white and he's definitely
Yeah.
white identifying. He doesn't identify with his culture.
Why is that? Because he's blonde?
I think
Yeah.
he's just experienced more of that. Like to claim you're native when you're like that is, I mean, it's difficult even as like me to claim I'm native and get people to understand that this is what a native person looks like. But when you're like toe-headed and you're like he's the only yeah, he doesn't have anything Indian about him, and that's okay. But people
Not
definitely
even not even in his like home life?
no, we were just talking about this. He's in the Air Force. He's visiting
Okay.
right now. And his wife was just asked, she's like, I took Native American Studies in college to get like closer to Devin. And then I found out he doesn't care.
Oh.
So he hasn't even,
Do they
he's
have
not on
kids?
that. Yeah. He's
Okay.
not on that journey like I've been actively on the journey to reconnect with my culture because I
Yeah.
understand why why we disconnected, and it's a privilege that I live in a space where I can reconnect and not have to be worried about my safety.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm really on that journey, but he's
What do you mean your safety?
so, like they chose those things because they were trying to think about their future and how, they chose to marry white men. They chose to go to
Uh-huh.
school, to boarding school, to send their kids to boarding school because that was the choice that was going to keep them alive. It
Yeah.
was going to give them the most like success in the future, right? So I know that I'm a culmination of that vigilance, and that the only reason I have even the ability to like look into my heritage and to practice it is because those people had to make those really shitty decisions. And it's a huge privilege for me to live in the world that I live in now and be able to reconnect with that.
Do you feel guilt by identifying as Native?
Yeah, all the time. I try not to do it unless someone brings it up. That's
Oh,
how it is now.
yeah.
Um, because I am privileged. And even though I had, you know, my home life was not good. And I had lots of shit that happened, and it's all intergenerational. And I understand that. I can see the lines very clearly. Um, that I still know that my life is so different than so many people who have an Indigenous experience, and mine's so privileged. And I don't like to speak too much on it, other than the white identifying, because that's my experience. I can speak on
Yeah.
that. I feel a lot more comfortable about that.
From all of these talks that I've been doing, including myself, like everybody is so different. Everybody is like a different ethnicity,
Yeah,
but everyone says the same thing, that they have a hard time identifying with their non-white culture, or
yeah,
just like didn't completely grow up in their non-white culture. And it is this identity crisis that everybody I've talked to has.
yeah,
And like it's been making me feel better because I've also had the same issue growing up. Like it never occurred to me like to deflect racism. It's like I grew up in Helena, and Helena is not very
yeah,
diverse.
yeah,
But my mom would always sit us down growing up, and she'd say, "You're Filipino, you're not white, but you need to be proud to be Filipino because like
yeah,
it's a privilege to be."
absolutely.
And like so it never occurred to me to interpret things growing up as racist because I was already taught I'm proud to be Filipino,
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah, yeah,
know.
yeah.
But I did get pulled into like other racisms towards other ethnicities because people didn't know what I was, so they just pulled me into whatever they thought I was.
Yeah,
um but I forgot where I was going with that.
that's okay.
But um yeah, what was I saying before that?
You were talking about us, like how everybody feels that way, how everybody, no matter
Oh,
what heritage they come from, they're all feeling like we're not,
oh,
you know,
yeah.
we
And
don't feel
so
identified.
like I knew my identity growing up. And
Yeah.
then it wasn't until I started dating white boys and like being around their families. And then suddenly, like, I had a boyfriend tell me, like, you're white, like, you're not Asian. And then he also said Filipinos weren't Asian. And like, we got into a big fight about that. Like, this happened, like, this fight continued over years. And every time I was like, okay, please go to my mom and tell her she's not Asian.
Yeah.
Like, because my mom migrated from the Philippines to the US.
Yeah. Okay, absolutely.
But yeah, so I don't know, like, if that makes you feel better, like, about, I think it's just really important to know, like, literally every BIPOC person has a completely different story, but there is that thing that unifies us, and that we all just kind of like, there is like this undeserving guilt of identifying with our other culture.
100%. And it's like this, I talk about that, like your own, internalized colonialism, and like, my skin's like a representation of like the survival tactics that my parent or that my grandparents took to, survive. Um, but like there's so much stuff in my head where I'm like, I can't even speak on that because that's not my experience. I can't occupy that space. And I know that I've been like let into spaces that like my cousins wouldn't be let into. I think that all the time.
Like
Because
what?
so I grew up, I grew up on the reservation. I grew up like
Oh,
15 miles away from my cousins, but they speak differently than me.
okay.
They
What do you
have
mean
like,
they speak differently?
so do you know how like they speak like natives.
Okay.
So they went to school in Browning and I went to school in Cutbank, and they just, they talk differently than me. And when I'd go and hang out with them, I talked like them. I would just like kind of go into that. And but when I go, that's why part of the reason people don't think I'm native, because I don't talk like I grew up on the reservation. I
Okay.
don't have that like accent. I know.
That's so
Um,
stupid.
I know. So I know even just that with my cousins just speaking differently than me would keep them from certain spaces that I occupy
Okay.
in my life. Like I'm well aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always like one of those things where it's like I can't occupy the space that they occupy if they can't occupy the space that I occupy. There's just something wrong about that. So stepping over that line to go into their world and to speak on their world, it was always like, I'm allowed to do this. You guys are letting me in, but you're not let in my way. So
Yeah. As
that
you've
was
got
always hard.
as you've gotten older, do you feel like you've been trying to incorporate more native um like routines, rituals into your life?
Yes.
Like
Well, I'm
even
just
language?
absolutely. So I took Blackfeet in college, and I didn't do well in it.
Okay.
And I think it was mainly just because the teacher wasn't a linguist. She was just a speaker,
Oh,
which is great. But
okay.
if you're not a linguist and you're trying to teach kids how to speak, it's kind of hard. And there was just not a lot of resources. It was like 2010, I think, when I took it. And now there's like the Pagan Institute, and they're like reviving the Blackfeet language.
Okay.
So there's all sorts of resources now. They have like an encyclopedia, and they're
What's
doing
the Pagan Institute?
so it's just it's a it's a business in Browning where they're it's kind of like, I don't know if you know about up at the Salish Kootenai, they have schools now where they're teaching the language. So
Okay.
that's what they're doing at the Pagan Institute. They're teaching the children the languages. They're teaching everyone the languages, but they're asking kids to come and learn Blackfeet from, because there's very very few speakers right
Okay.
now. And so there's some elders, and there's a couple of their kids, the elders' kids that have learned, and they're teaching them. They're
That's
teaching the
really,
native.
it's scary that only a small group of people still speak the language.
Yes. Well, on the Blackfeet, their blood quantum level is really high too. The quota you have to be actually enrolled in the tribe it's over 25%. So
Okay.
most of the people, I'm not enrolled. I'm a descendant of an enrolled.
Mhm.
But there's most people are not enrolled in the tribe. Their numbers are very small, and they'll just keep getting smaller and smaller, and that's all part of the
Do you think,
plan.
yeah, do you think the blood quantum affects how people see themselves then?
100%. 100%. And that's part of that, like, we took that from them, this colonialization idea, this colonialized idea that there's some ratio of blood in you that's how you know if you're indigenous or not. That
Uh-huh.
was never something that was there before white people came. We didn't care about that. You were
Yeah.
native if you were native. You were native if you were part of the culture. And if you practiced and you were accepted, then you were native. There was nothing more than that. But now even natives feel that very much in themselves, that they're not enough. If they're not enough. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a huge problem. And I think that native people feel that within themselves big time.
Yeah, it seems like I don't know, it depends. Like I think for it, that with indigenous, that they're not enough to be indigenous, but then with the black people I know, a lot of them are half, they're also biracial, but
Mm-hmm.
then they get categorized as only being black,
Black.
and
Yeah.
like that is so confusing to me.
I know, it's bizarre. I know. I don't understand that either, but I've noticed that as well, is that you are black if you're half, but if I'm half white as a native, I'm white. I'm not Indian.
Yeah, do you
It's
think
because
that
I feel like people think that there's some benefit to being Native.
That there's benefit to being Native? Okay, can you elaborate?
Just when you hear the stereotypes of being Native, not only like, oh, you're getting money from the government and, like you're being taken care of. Basically, there's this idea that you're taken care of, but also that you're somehow deeper connected to the spiritual realm, and that you have some sort of like wise owl, like you're protected or something by like the nature. I mean, I was just at work. I work at the steakhouse out in Lolo. And just the other day, the guy was asking me where I grew up. And I was like, oh, I grew up really north of here. I grew up in Cutbank, on the Blackfoot Reservation. He's like, well, you're not Native. And I was like, no, I am. And he's like, do you feel more connected to the spirits? And do you, like, that's the first thing that came out of his mouth. And it's like, I mean, yes, but that's not like you know what I mean? That's not where you should immediately go. And it's only because I've done work, it's not just because I woke up one day and I was like, oh, the trees talk to me. I was like, you have to reconnect to nature, and anyone can do that. But because I'm Native, they immediately think I have some sort of like portal into like, I don't know, the Garden of Eden or something. I don't know.
It's confusing to me that things like that happen still. With social media and like access, like
people don't care though. No one cares to educate themselves. I've had this conversation a lot, like the fact that Native people carry around the shame that we're not responsible for any of the shit that happened to us. I don't know why Native people carry around the shame. It's something that should be definitely dispersed a little bit more evenly. But I talk about that, or I talk about like there's this massacre that happened. It was the Bakers Massacre in the Blackfeet. It happened in 1870, 1873 maybe. And like 100 women, children, and elderly were just massacred by the Colonel Baker. And they were innocent. The men were all hunting, and they were trying to find a mountain chief. It was the wrong band. They killed this ally. It was like this horrible thing. No one knows anything about that. I mean,
this
so much
is
stuff here.
news to me.
And we're in here. I'm born and raised in Montana. I've had history classes. I've had all sorts of stuff. I've been all over, and you never learn about the Bakers. You never learn anything. You learn like just this basic thing, and it still reinforces this idea that you already have. It doesn't question the idea that you have.
I don't know how old you are, but like growing up in Helena, it was like only 4th grade. That was Montana history.
Yeah, we had it. So I'm 31. I had it when I was, in Cutbank we had it. Cutbank was different. It was like we were more educated about what was happening because the reservation's right there. I mean, it's like a mile away in Cutbank at the school. And again, half the class is Indigenous. And Lewis and Clark, it was a huge thing in Cutbank. Lewis and Clark was. So we knew all about this stuff. And like, I grew up on the land where, Lewis and Clark only fought with the Blackfeet, and on my ranch land, the fight site was on. So people would come to look at the fight site, and I was really educated. There. And then we moved here, and then, I don't know anything about the Flathead. I don't know anything about them. They're right there. I don't know any of their history. I never was taught it, nothing. And it's like, when I say some of the stuff I say, people are just like, what are you talking about? I'm like, just Google. I mean, it's insane. Just type it in. You'll find so much stuff. But having that, the motivation to educate themselves, there's very few people out there that actually do that.
Yeah. And also I think knowing what to Google too.
Well, what are you? Yeah, because you are going to find more biases if you're just Googling something that's biased. But I'm always open to have conversations. That's why, like, when people are like, you have to do the work yourself, I do not agree with that. I am also, I am learning constantly from people. So I think that I'm always down to have a conversation with someone, even if I feel like they're kind of bigoted. Because I feel like that's how we need to hold space for people like that so that they can change. But
do you think though that being biracial, I think with like your family marrying into white families helps you have, or makes you more sympathetic to like white naivety?
To white ignorance, 100%. Well, and especially when I look at my close friend group, it wasn't until, like 2 or 3 years ago, do you know Kendra Potter?
Um, wait, does she work at Drum? Right.
No,
No.
she's the yoga teacher. You should reach out to her because her story is
Okay.
incredibly interesting. She was adopted out of her tribe, as was her mom, and
Okay.
then reconnected with her mom way later in her life. They did a documentary about it actually,
Wow.
and she went back to like she never really knew she was Native until she was like in her 20s. She didn't know.
Does she look Native?
Yeah, she looks like, as Native as me, or
Uh-huh.
as ethnic as me or you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
wouldn't say, oh, she's Native,
Yeah.
but she has had just a very interesting journey. Once I like connected with her, I really started to be able to like acknowledge those feelings, because I heard her say something about white passing, and just in like passing I heard her say it, and I was like, wait, what'd you say about white passing? Let's have a conversation. um so she's someone you should definitely reach out to because her story is
Okay.
incredible. But prior to that, I was just completely surrounded by white people, especially here. Again, in Cup Bank, I had Indigenous friends, and there was lots of discussion. It was just constant discussion there because it was normal life. But when I came here, it was not normal life, and no one else was experiencing it. And again, looking more Native than like my brothers did was also like, like I've been like, are you Italian? Are you Spanish? Are you like, they don't go to Indian. It takes a long time to get to Indian just because they don't act like the way Montanans stereotypically think an Indian
Which is
acts.
also frustrating because, like, for me, I excused it because, like, Filipinos aren't, they're not
They're
like,
not around, right?
yeah, but
Yeah.
the fact that you're Native, though, I think that people should be able to pick up on that better.
You
Like,
would think that.
like,
So I've had to
yeah.
like really, I'm not like try to show my indigeneity to other people, but connect the dot. I have like a lot of now I have like a lot of artwork on me, and like I made the effort to make my space, to use the pieces that I had and to find pictures of my grandma and stuff like that, and just like this is how I identify. That might not be how you see me, but this is how I identify. So please start seeing me like this because
Yeah.
it's really frustrating.
When did that start happening for you?
When did I really want to start reconnecting?
When did you really want people to start identifying you the way that you identify?
When I went to college.
Okay.
Because I knew in high school it wasn't going to happen, just because of being Frenchtown and me not being what they thought was Native. I would have had to be just someone completely different for them to finally be like, oh yeah, she's Native. Um, but I went to college here, but I was taking, I minored in Native American Studies, and I wanted to just be able to hang out at the Native American Center at the Payne and just be there and be like part of that community and that group. And so I felt first like that's where I first felt like I needed to identify myself as Native. And so I would wear things to identify myself as Native.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes I'd catch myself talking, like I'd get caught up with someone who I knew from my younger days who would talk like that. I have this friend, Eric, who's very white presenting and he speaks very Native. And whenever I get with him, I start talking like that, which is normal, like a normal thing to go back to. But then I was like, I'm doing this so that people know I'm Native. And there was like a weird, is that okay to do? Am I like, there was I was ashamed of that, because
Okay.
again, feeling like I was occupying a space I didn't.
Do you still feel that way?
Not no.
And what
um
what did it take to get over that hump?
I think just continually doing it and then having people identify me as Native.
Yeah.
um Once that happened, and not with not with the intent, like maybe just going out and just being myself or doing something, and then someone identifying me as Native, and I was like, oh, I don't have to do all of those things that I've been doing to make people notice. I can just be myself, and there will be people out there who will recognize that that's Native. Just not
Yeah.
everybody, because like I said, people have this really deep biases about what Native people are.
Yeah. And I think that actually when you first meet someone, they will take your word for it. They're
Oh,
not
for
they're
sure.
not thinking, "Oh, you're not white or you're
Yeah.
not indigenous." Like,
Yeah, and now that I'm like more, it's more integrated in me instead of just like popping up around. Yeah, when people meet me, I think that they assume it now,
okay.
whereas before it was not an assumption that people made. So
And is that because of just the political climate changing too?
I think that, yeah, like people are just more aware. A lot of people are a lot more aware, especially younger people,
Yeah.
and just not having an assumption. right off the bat, right? Not immediately assuming something until you have a conversation with people.
Yeah.
And also, I think that's just like I said, because I'm more comfortable, as I've
Yeah.
just gotten older, even just, not being in your 20s and not feeling crazy. And I have an anxiety disorder. I was like medicated for a huge portion of my life.
Okay.
I've had sexual abuse and like all these things that were really hindering, me being who I was just normally. Just I had to block up. So once, you start working, you process your trauma. I divorced a not good man and separated myself from things. And then I was able, again, just to feel like that was myself. I think
Yeah.
that was more it than anything, is I didn't feel like I was myself. And now I'm like, oh, I feel indigenous. I feel native. And that's what I'm like presenting to other people. So
Yeah, I feel like having all these conversations, it seems like a lot of people have become closer to their other culture, but I'm realizing that when I was young, like all the way up until freshman, sophomore year of high school, I was really connected to my Filipino culture. And then as I started learning, I remember just being super obsessed with one of my boyfriend's families because they had just like a very, very white home life. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
so curious what that was like. And and I feel like since then, like until now, I've been trying to like get back to my Filipino roots, and I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a very tight-knit community where like all the Filipino mothers took care of us children together because most of them were divorced with kids.
Yeah,
And like so they'd alternate who had the kids, who was picking them up from school.
yeah.
My homelet, like outside of school, I didn't really get to hang out with my white friends. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was just the Filipino kids. And it's weird to think back on that because I feel like my life in Missoula is so white. And like I've been trying to learn Tagalog, even though like my
Yeah,
mom speaks Bisaya, but that's not a really accessible language to learn.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And I this is kind of all waking me up a little bit to the fact that I've been like dismissing my other
Yeah,
culture, like even though when I go to Helena, like I'm around all these people again, but
yeah,
I've really separated my Missoula life from like my Filipino home life.
yeah. I can definitely relate to that too. I know what you mean. Well, since I moved here, I don't even have to think about what my life was like back then. But when I got married and we went on our honeymoon, we went back to the ranch I grew up on, and it was like this whole like same thing, very community, very, very, very community. Like I always had my family with my grandparents they were the closest neighbor and they just lived up over the hill from us. And then I remember when we moved away, the hardest thing for me was that I didn't have them anymore. That I didn't have that community anymore. And I think that there was some sort of like, kind of protective layer where I was like, I'm not going to go searching for this. I could go searching for this here and I could probably find something that would be fulfilling in a lot of different manners. Like I remember the kids who were Salish Kootenai in my class would do like they do Indian tacos on like Saturdays at the
Oh,
school, and they'd dance. They would do like we'd have assemblies and they do their jingle dance and stuff. And I never was like I never partook. I was definitely like there was an opportunity to. You can like
yeah.
identify yourself with this group. They want you here. You can dance. You can do this stuff for them. But I was like, I don't want to. I have one. It's back there. I don't want to make a new one. And then when I went back home, I was like, wow, I've been denying myself something pretty intense. And that was 2015. And I think that's really when things amped up for me. And in the last 5 years was like, okay, read the books. I have so many books, like reconnect with the myths, just like reach out to family, just reconnect because it's all there and it's been there for you and it's there everywhere. If I wanted to do that even here in this community, I could do it. But I think that I'm not quite there yet. That's probably
Okay.
my next step
I was
in
gonna
my
ask, are you
yeah.
like, do you have like a little community?
Besides Kendra, who I'm saying who's also white presenting, so it's like that's that internalized colonialism that I feel like I'm
Yeah.
living out, is that I don't have any people around me, except for people who come visit from Cupping. I have this friend Lisa Joe. She comes. She and I are super close still, but it's not like, no. My immediate friends are
Yeah.
white, and
But
I haven't.
it's different as being biracial. Like it's hard. I think it's totally okay that like that's your community because you have similar experiences that you can relate
For
on
sure.
and you feel comfortable sharing like like your relationship with your native self, you know? Like
Yeah.
and I feel like my community other than like these other moms that I had, you know, um, are all of my cousins that I grew up with. Like
Yeah.
we all live in different places, but those are the people that I do feel the most connected to, other than my
Yeah.
little sister.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely get that. And yeah, it does make sense that we can occupy the white space and have this white community. And I am like the only person that they're getting a native experience from.
Okay.
But also like I know that like I said, I know my native experience is skewed. And I think that's part of the reason where it feels like I can't occupy that native space, because
Yeah.
they're gonna be more native. Their experience is, in my head, this is what I'm thinking, it's wrong, but that their experience is going to be more native than mine, and it's going to somehow take away from my experience. And when I go back to my community of white people, I'm no longer going to be able to speak about my experience in the way I was speaking about it before. And that's all just me again minimizing what my experience has been as a native person,
Mm-hmm.
because it feels like it's not valid.
What was your parents' dynamic? Like, what was growing up like for you culturally?
um, So again, my dad was so distanced. He's so incredibly intelligent. He's a historian. He worked at the Travelers Rest out in Lolo for many, many years. He was what they call the interpreter, which means
Okay.
he's a storyteller. And he is. My dad's very much a storyteller. He has kept a lot of those stories alive in us. We listened to Jack Gladstone growing up. He's a Blackfeet singer, and he sings about Napi, who is the old man in the sky. He's our creator, and like the bear who stole the Chinook, and Coyote, who trickster Coyote. And I learned all these things, and my dad would tell us these stories. And my dad was also like, because of this historian aspect of him, he was really like to trace us back. So the Mountain Chief, who was a very, very famous chief who caused a lot of trouble, he was like one of our, like my great, 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 great grandfather. And then I had my grandma's cousin, or my grandma's brother, was in a movie with Shirley Temple. He was a
What?
little Indian boy. Yeah, it's called Susanna the Mounties, and she plays around with this lithe Indian boy, and he was my uncle, my great uncle.
Wow.
So things like that I was really connected to, and we would go to, like I said, we go to powwow and Indian days. And then I would spend like weeks at my aunt's house with my cousins. And then like my mom, they all grew up in the same area. My family's been from that area for like over 100 years, both sides. So they knew each other. And so we were like very enmeshed, like my grandparents on my mom's side and my grandparents on my dad's side, we worked together, they ranched together. They're very involved together, but you have the crossover of like native and cowboy, because
Okay.
we're ranchers, right? So there's so many native cowboys. So you're out, we go to powwow and Indian days, but also you go to square dances, and my grandpa played fiddle, and you do that kind of gig too. And brandings are probably the biggest community thing. And when I was growing up was
Okay.
we'd go to brandings, we'd have our own brandings, and then you'd go to brandings all over the reservation and help people out and have potlucks and sit around and listen to the old ladies talk, and they crochet and knit and bead. And
Well, it sounds like you had a very indigenous upbringing
yeah.
and and like what it sounds to me like what keeps you or what makes you feel guilty about identifying as native other than just like white passing is like this sense of guilt for not experiencing the same oppression.
Absolutely. Just because of this.
Yeah.
Because of this and this. And if I had a little bit more of this and a little bit more of the way I spoke, I would be experiencing that. I know I would have. Like, it would have happened to me, especially here. But I'm well spoken. And I think that's one of the biggest parts of people not treating me like I'm Native, is that they don't think that Native people are well spoken.
Well,
They
I
don't.
think this doesn't ever get talked about, that literally the only reason why you have an issue identifying as Native, which you are, you know, you are Native,
Yes.
is because you feel guilty for being white passing.
Yeah.
I feel like so many people.
There's no I've been writing about this a lot just because I think about it a lot, and it's relevant right now. And I'm like looking for other resources out there, and the only resources are other white passing people. You know, the only thing that's been written about this is this phenomenon of how people feel is other white passing people, and they're all, like you just said, they're all saying the same thing. It's like occupying, you get all of the good things and none of the bad things.
Yeah.
Right? People look at me and they're like, oh, you're Native, you have beautiful fingers, and you, like, you know, you got long hair, and you're, you know, like, you're tan, and then, but I'm not, there's none of the dangers.
Yeah.
You know, like, if I fall into a depression, or if I like drank myself into a stupor, you wouldn't, my culture, you wouldn't shame my culture, you know, because you wouldn't associate it at all with me being Native. But if my aunt does, then you're going to be like, oh, it's because she's Native. You know, if she drinks herself into a stupor, if she falls into depression, or if she gets money from the government, then that's because she's Native.
Have you been researching this for a while?
Yeah, I would say since like probably 2015 or 2016. I've been just like, I have a couple, there's one person who wrote their master thesis on it, and it's incredibly interesting. I just have that saved on my phone. I pull it up a lot, and
Can you send
echoes.
That to me?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it echoes like pretty much everything that I feel. He calls himself white seeming because he's not trying to pass as anything.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I love that. I'm like, I would like that to be what we say, white seeming Indigenous person, because I am white seeming, but I'm not trying to pass as a white person anymore.
Yeah.
I think there was a time in my life where I was, but not like I was hiding, but I was definitely trying to.
I get it. I think that like my college experience, I tried to talk about this, like my whole thesis work was on being biracial and dealing with like this identity crisis, but my critiques were really uncomfortable. And like so much that I didn't want to talk about it for like a couple of years. This is like, honestly, this is the first time that I've like really talked about my dual identity since my senior year of college, just because like people just like, I've pretty much ever since like high school to that time of my life, anytime I would talk about it, people would dismiss me and be like, but you're white passing, you have no problems, like you're totally fine, like you shouldn't even be talking about this. And so I have internalized that, and this is like really the first time like through these conversations that I realized, oh, other people go through this.
And they've also internalized it too. Like pretty much, I feel like most people I've talked to have been like, oh, someone's told me, or like invalidated my experience, told me that I wasn't, you know. I think all the time about that. I was in 8th grade, and I think all the time about that girl coming up to me when I wore my Native Pride shirt. I think about it like every other day. Think about how she came out to me and was like, you're not Native. And it was like, those things just start sticking to you, and you start believing it, and then you start believing that that experience isn't part of an Indigenous experience or a Filipino experience, and that you're so, you know, blessed and privileged beyond because you look like you're white, that you don't have a space to speak on things. And I definitely felt that way for a long, long time. I didn't start asserting until I started to get pissed about Columbus Day again, you know, starting to get like all riled up about it. And I just had one rant on Instagram, and I was like, you know, if this upsets you, maybe you should look at yourself, just saying. And I got like so much feedback from that, just people like asking questions too, which I was like, oh, thank you for asking questions, because people don't ask questions either. They just
What
come
kind of
up to you
questions are they asking?
like, well, tell me about your Native experience. Tell me what it was like. Where did you grow up? You know, like, instead of being like, how much Native are you?
Okay,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Which, you know, instantly invalidates your experience. I feel like if I have to explain to you that I'm Native, then you're invalidating my experience right off the bat, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I like you said, I grew up pretty Indigenous, and I experienced Indigenous problems. I experienced problems that exist in Indigenous circles, and that, you know, especially like, you know, it was ancestral abuse that I had, that I experienced, and that is a huge problem in Native cultures.
Okay.
And actually, that's probably, I would say that's probably when I really tried to get reconnected. I took this class, and it was about a year before my honeymoon. It was called, oh, I can't think of it right now, but it was about Indigenous healing, like health and healing. And we read this book about tribe, I can't even think of the tribe right now in Canada, but who had a super high incestual sexual offender rate, and they were sending them to prisons. They were putting them in the Western system, and then they were coming back and reoffending, and it was like a 98% of that come back and reoffend. And so the tribal, all the elders, everybody got together, and they're like, this doesn't work. Something's not working here. We need to go back to the holistic ways. We need to go back to our ways, and that's called the holistic healing circle.
Okay.
And so it's a circle of whoever wants to partake, pretty much the whole tribe, big circle, and the victim and the victimizer are in the middle. And they talk, and they just talk about everything. And then from my own experience, I remember reading about that and then watching a documentary about it and having to like leave the room and go into the bathroom and cry, because I was like, if that had been done for me, if we had done that for me, my whole life would look different. Like if I had had that kind of process and what happened to me, then this, you know, the anxiety, the whole experience that I've been living and that my family had been living, and like if we just been doing this for generations and generations, then this would be all different for me. And that was when I was really like, whoa, I'm doing myself a huge disservice by not like looking into these things and recognizing how much more this isn't just mine. It's not just mine. It's my grandma's, it's my great grandma's, it's my dad's, it's my aunt's, it's everybody's. And you know, I'm just the one who's here holding it right now.
Okay.
So that was when I really was like, okay, if you need to like figure out, you know, not only just like how to reconnect to your, you know, your Native culture, but how to use that to heal. Because I had been, you know, on pharmaceuticals, hadn't been dealing with like, you know, still actively even now in my life have conversation with my victimizer, you know, hadn't processed a lot of things, and it wasn't just the disservice to myself, but it was a disservice to my heritage to not be doing the work. I was like, these people did the work. Like that's the work, and that's hard work, to be sitting in a circle with all these people and like say what happened to you and have that person say what they did to you, and then have that everyone say how that made them feel, would be so healing.
It would be,
Like,
and I feel like that makes someone confront the things that they did rather than spending time
deflect.
behind bars.
Yeah, and being taken care of, and then come back to a community. So that was something that was like, okay, yeah, I'm not just only hurting myself, I'm hurting my heritage by not acknowledging that there's other ways to do this, and that I have been hurt, and that other people have been hurt. And I think that was when I really was like, okay, time to put my toe back into this, because I'm feeling a loss. I feel a void somewhere, you know, it's obvious.
I want to circle back. What are ways that have been helpful for you to reconnect with your Indigenous culture?
Art. I would say art has been the number one way. I have a couple cousins who are artists. One of them is John Isaiah Peppian, and he does ledger art. So they do like old ledgers, bank ledgers. They do this really amazing Blackfeet art, and also this man Terrence Gardapi. And I ended up getting like inspirations of both of them tattooed on me. And then just like going out of my way to buy from Indigenous makers, to just cognizantly, instead of like going and buying just something at Target when I want to go buy something for myself, I'm just going online and finding Indigenous make and buying directly from them. And then books, and music. And like I said, I grew up with Jack Gladstone as like a teacher, and so I just would go back and listen to his music. I still do. I was just the other day listening to it. He has a song called "The Bear Who Stole the Chinook," and they're like, they're not. Some of them aren't very. They're like kids songs almost, but they're telling you a story, and that's the story that I would have heard if I had been a kid growing up truthfully, as in a Native experience. And then some of them are actual history, like talking about massacres and things like that. And so it's like learning things with the songs. And then, I have a ton of books, not only from my dad, but also from taking Native American Studies classes.
Okay.
That are like, there's accessible books, they're easy to read. And then there's ones that are like, textbooks. But all of those things was the work I did by myself. And then, like I said, when I was presenting myself to other people, somehow that just became more Native, and that was work too. And that really helped, like when I started doing that and feeling that coming back to me, without having to explicitly lay out who I am.
Do you think
That
that
was
this is going to be just a lifelong journey?
100%. Yeah, for sure. And it will be reflective of wherever I'm at in my life too. Right now I feel good about it. I'm in a good place in my life. I have a good community, and I have, like I said, there's just like this moment that's happening that is making people more aware of how they behave. I had a friend reach out and apologize. She grew up in Great Falls, and she used to say things like, "Oh yeah, that girl is Native, no offense." And I was like,
Oh,
why?
really?
She would just say stuff like that to me all the time, and I'd be like, why is that offensive? Why is you saying someone like it? So she has had a lot of like undoing to do, and
Yeah. Did she was just worried, like she didn't know how to speak around you?
she like has the idea that Native people are bad people, that are drunks, that are drug addicts, that
Oh.
are like walking the street of Great Falls, fucking shit up. And she had that idea. So she would say something about a bad person and be like, she was Native, no offense.
Oh,
But
okay.
if I was like talking about fucking Donald Trump, I wouldn't be like, he was white, no offense. It was like,
Yeah.
bad people, like they're all over. It's just, so that was like one of those things that I was like, what? I was hard to even get her to understand what I meant when she said that, when I was like, that's offensive. That's an offensive thing to say. Like, because you're one assuming that she's that way because she's Native, and that it's offensive to me that I'm Native.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're in a moment, and I don't know how long that will suspend. Heart change is so different than just like the fire change that we're feeling right now. But I think it's an opportunity for sure. So
Yeah.
I'm gracious for it.
All right. I just have one last question for you. What would you like to see in Missoula, especially to make it more inclusive especially for biracial, BIPOC community members, where you feel like people are identifying you correctly? Like what would be helpful?
Oh man. I mean, I wish I like knew a super accessible way for that, like, because it feels like it's dismantling, and I know that that's all like an individual's prerogative to dismantle. Because I don't feel like, just because we live in Montana mainly, I don't feel like we can. I feel like this is still something I'm going to be doing forever. That
Yeah.
I'm going to be, I don't want to say defending my nativeness, but I'm going to be defending my nativeness probably for the rest of my life. But I don't know about generations to come. That might be different. So I don't know what I could say that would be like an easy one thing that people could do. But I do feel like what you're doing right here, which is like connecting, and what like Rio was doing, is like, if we just connect these people, like I didn't, and when she posted that up, I got all sorts of like Blackfeet people following me, and I didn't realize that there were so many Blackfeet people in Missoula that I didn't know, that I hadn't gone to school with or something. And so I was like, oh, like just that, if we was creating a space for us to just all connect to each other, because I think most of us are living that experience of like, I'm the only, person of color in my friend group, and someone else is the only person of color in their friend group, and we just need these people to all come together and be in their own friend group, and to be able to have these discussions with other people, like you just said, not just me and you, but, 10 or 15 other people
Yeah.
who have experienced some variation of this, I think that would be really helpful. And to just have that group be out in the world in different ways, be
Mm-hmm.
out in the community in a different way.
Do you know Alex Kim?
Mm-mm.
Have you heard of BIPOC Outdoors?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay, so it's just like a completely brand new thing. But Alex Kim is Korean American,
Okay.
and he's a photographer here in town. He's
Oh,
actually on
wait.
the list.
Okay, yeah, now that you're saying
Yeah.
that, because I'm pretty sure I stalked everyone on the list, and
Oh,
now that
okay.
you're saying that, I'm remembering that. Okay, what else? What else did he do?
So he works for Empower Montana, and they put together resources for the BIPOC community to come together and do outdoor stuff together. Like, so they've
Fun.
been on some rafting trips, and I know that there's like some camping ones coming up. And I tried to like empty out some spaces in September because I think they're all on Sundays
Oh,
to like
fun.
go do some. But I think like that is something that I think speaks to what you're saying.
For sure. That's
Really.
definitely what I mean, is that we just getting that group of people together in spaces where we feel safe to have conversations about these things and not judged. I think that will change how we interact with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And
And
that might be
ourselves.
that change. Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. And that can be that change that we're so desperately looking for. That could be the catalyst. So community is always where it starts.
It is.
For
Right.
sure.
Right. Well, thank you. I will send you Alex's Instagram.
I would love
And
that.
then, okay. But thanks
Thank
for taking the
you.
time to talk to me today. It was really nice meeting
Absolutely.
you.
You as well. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.